Our topic for today is countering deficit views of Latinx students through border pedagogies. And our group consists of myself, Justine, and Rebecca. Current research reveals that prior knowledge and cultural artifacts of Latinx students are usually dismissed in formal schooling contexts because of deficit views. Our group really wanted to research the answers to the following questions. How are contributions of Latinx students being rejected? How can critical border pedagogical lenses aid in the understanding of such deficit construction? How can border pedagogies such as testimonials, Nepantla, and third space be employed so that students and their teachers can participate in collective critical dialogue toward emancipatory education? Now, these questions will be addressed throughout our presentation, and we will each provide recommendations on how educational pedagogical approaches can provide more meaningful learning experiences for all students. Now, Latinx students have valuable talents to offer. The problem is that their contributions do not align with dominant discourse. So they are usually seen as a group that needs fixing and saving. Rosa and Flores inform that a culture of poverty perspective has been historically affixed to this community, as well as conventional dualisms that dismiss their talents. A couple of examples of such dualisms are emphasized by Gutierrez et al. And Medina, and they talk about how knowledge has become categorized as either formal or informal, as well as the mind, it's split from the body, so that cognition is only seen as a capacity of the mind. So when Latinx students bring to school what Cashman refers to as embodied knowledge and experience, as well as their cultural artifacts in their home languages, these valuable assets, sadly, they get labeled as non-academic and are rejected. Rosa and Flores argue that societal structures and their mechanisms are what marginalize Latinx youth. And one of these mechanisms is criminalization through semiotic sign systems. The work of Pinau educates that the body actually emits politics through semiotic resources such as color, clothing, gesture, and symbols. Now, what tends to happen is that Latinx youth are affixed with criminalization because they are viewed at risk and they're targeted by procedures that are preemptive in nature. Now, one way that we can counter such systemic mechanisms is through the border pedagogy of testimonials. Cervantes, Sun, and Carrillo elaborate that testimonials are a spiritual confessing of embodied experiences that expose suffering, integrity, and guidance to others. Testimonials offer a space for the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual aspects. Now, this is something that cannot be achieved through state-mandated tests. Now, just as Cervantes Sun highlights in her text, teachers can make schoolwork relevant by infusing students' barrio vernacular, as well as related experiences from their home and community. In addition, testimonials are not just restricted to oral storytelling, but they can also be expressed through multimodalities, such as poetry, dance, music, theater, and art. Now, something that stands out in Cervantes, Sun, and Carrillo's text is a teacher's willingness to be vulnerable with their students. And this process is very similar to testimonials because value is given to knowledge that's not necessarily generated through the logical, the formal, or academic origins, but this is through a genuine space of sharing and connecting with another human being. And educators can certainly incorporate these testimonials and displays of vulnerability by engaging students through an engaged pedagogy and a curriculum is lived. Both of these practices encourage teachers to view education as a process that they are also the students. They are also learning from their students and willing to model and do what they ask of their students to do. All of these practices should motivate teachers to invite students to reinterpret classroom practice, or as Alexander puts it, teaching as negotiation. And this is very important because it acknowledges that students have the capacity to bring alternative approaches to their lessons and activities. This negotiation is very important because it helps students to understand that their choices, their ideas, their decisions, they really do contribute to real transformations in their world.
Unsurprisingly, the naturalization of discourse in the United States K-12 school settings creates deficit views of Latinx students. In the US, Latinx youth are subjected to educational systems that marginalize the many languages and cultures that define these students' worldview. Some pedagogy aimed at helping marginalized students proves to be a disservice to them. The development of child-centered pedagogy was intended to give power to students by encouraging them to use their natural language to discuss things that they felt were important. However, the reality of this approach is that adults are ultimately still in control of what students talk and write about in the classroom. Problem-based learning aimed at teaching students how to solve problems in social contexts also appeared to be a valuable initiative. However, imagined scenarios presented had little to no relation to students' lived experiences, and adults were still in control of these scenarios. Both of these well-intended initiatives ultimately illustrate that students are given very little control over their learning experience at school. Third space pedagogies counter deficit views of Latinx students by necessitating creative spatial thinking and a shift in perspective. Utilizing a third space consciousness in the classroom allows students to widen their worldview and cultural perspective by combining cultural information from their unique lived experiences. Through this process, students utilize third space as an alternative lens or hybrid approach in which their engagement in classroom activities results in critical praxis. Creating a third space in classrooms means creating a space where students' lived cultural experiences can merge with their academic understanding. Cultural dialogue should continuously highlight the myriad of cultural approaches and perspectives that students experience outside the classroom. Effective classroom dialogue that is influenced by students' lived experiences rather than what adults deem appropriate for the classroom is necessary in creating third space consciousness and ultimately cultural respect and understanding. Third space, Soja quotes, "Third space is a meeting point, a hybrid place where one can move beyond the existing borders. It is also a place of marginal women and men where old connections can be disturbed and new ones emerge. A third space consciousness is the precondition to building a community of resistance to all forms of hegemonic power." The utilization of third space pedagogy aids in deepening the understanding of spatiality, which in turn creates an environment where Latinx culture can be valued and appreciated. Creating a third space consciousness in the classroom not only deepens the understanding of spatiality, it also encourages one to reconsider the relationship with spatiality and how that affects their general worldview. Grunewald, 2003, quotes, "Place-based pedagogies are needed so that the education of citizens might have some direct bearing on the well-being of the social and ecological places people actually inhabit. Therefore, place-based pedagogies would be useful in cultivating third space."
Along with other factors of deficit views of Latinx students, tracking systems have put in place as a means of tailoring education to a student's perceived abilities and motivation levels. Tracking creates the narrative that minority students are othered because their own histories, culture, language, and traditions are ignored in the educational process. Colonial difference is reinforced as students must study information they cannot relate to in order to pass standardized tests. When students who are involuntary minorities, primarily Black and Latinx, do not perform as well as their peers in different social classes, they are made to feel as though they are to blame for their lack of success and experience a subalternization of their own cultural capital. Mehan posits that these structures are in place as a correspondence between the organization of work and the organization of school, in which students who are at the bottom of the class economy are placed into ability groups or tracks that encourage docility and conformity to extremal rules and authority, and to learn the skills associated with manual work. One of the ways that students can circumvent the systems that are in place to accommodate without assimilating is the application of Nepantla, which is an ideology proposed by Gloria Ansaldúa, which is, quote, the zone between changes where you struggle to find equilibrium between the outer expression of change and your inner relationship to it, close quote. This idea, when applied in tandem with Bakhtin's ideological becoming, which asserts that we must decide for ourselves what is of value, what is good and true, and base our lives and actions on these decisions, can benefit students. In the confluence of these spaces is where students can bring those aspects of themselves that are ignored by current educational frameworks. Students can determine what their educational goals are, what place their familial histories hold in the pursuit of that education, and how they will impact their communities. As Nepantla can be reviewed as a transient space, students are free to move about in this space in a safe way, exploring different worldviews and synthesizing new information without being pushed into preconceived pockets. For students to value education and feel that they are valued, educators must reciprocally value every student's cultural capital. We can change the narrative for Latinx students by applying a synthesis of Alexander's 3 versions of human relations: individualism, collectivism, and community, and border pedagogy. Cervantes soon urges that students be taught, quote, to locate themselves in their particular histories and simultaneously confront the limits of their own perspectives as part of a broader engagement with democratic public life, close quote. For teachers, inclusion of border pedagogy as part of their training and development would better leverage them, either to recognize value in the cultural capital of their students, or to help students find value in their differences, resulting in more understanding, empathetic students overall. To conclude, border pedagogies can provide students and teachers hope and space to regroup despite destructive deficit mechanisms imposed within schooling environments. Through the application of border pedagogies and complicated conversations, we can create hybrid approaches for academic success. The texts we have covered today underscore the idea that creating dialogue around our differences and confronting topics of inequality and social justice is crucial to addressing the falsehood that school systems are politically neutral, and that pedagogies such as Testimonials, Nepantla, and Third Space offer educational stakeholders a space in which to explore differences, initiate dialogue, and create effective change. Our research has taught us that together, teachers, students, and educational stakeholders can join forces and use school environments as sites of resistance or battlegrounds to counter deficit views and social reproduction. Thank you.